Hey guys, tonight, we're taking a long, dusty walk back to one of humanity's earliest filing cabinets, ancient Sumer. Picture a land of cracked clay streets, sleepy canals, and markets that smell like old onions and slightly nervous goats. You'll be slipping into the role of a junior scribe, yes, you with inkless tools, a desk made of mud, and the thrilling responsibility of inventing the receipt. You're not here to conquer, to fight, or to fall in love with a Babylonian princess. No. You're here to tally shipments of barley and count fish. This is bedtime history after all, and we're putting bureaucracy to bed. Just so you know, though, you probably won't survive this 9-hour work day. Your stylus will break at least twice, someone will definitely yell at you about chicken prices, and if you miss a shipment of lentils, yeah, good luck explaining that to the temple priests. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun has just dipped below the low skyline of one of the first true cities on Earth. You're walking through the merchant quarter, your sandals coated in river dust. The air hums with the scent of damp grain, smoldering reeds, and the sharp tang of fermented date wine. You carry a shoulder bag not for snacks, sadly, but for your precious slabs of wet clay and a few carefully carved writing sticks made from river reeds. People brush past you, trading with casual intensity bundles of garlic, fistfuls of wool, fresh fish wrapped in leaves. A teenager barters for a bronze razor. Someone's yelling about spoiled beer, and at the center of it all, a growing need for proof. I gave you this. You owe me that this sheep was not lame when I sold it. They don't want arguments. They want records. That's where you come in. Your boss, an elderly scribe with crooked fingers and no visible sense of humor, waves you over. He's sitting cross-legged behind a low stone table beneath a fraying linen canopy. Farmer Narum claims the priests underpaid him again, he says without looking up. Scratch it into the clay quickly before he starts crying. You squat down on your haunches, press the tablet flat with your palm, and begin. The writing isn't letters exactly. It's little angled shapes, wedges really pressed carefully into the clay using the tip of your stylus. This script is called cuneiform, from the Latin cuneus, meaning wedge. It looks simple. It's not. It's like trying to write a legal contract in Morse code using a chopstick. But here's the magical thing: this was writing before there were books, before alphabets. Before the idea of letters even existed, Sumerians used symbols and marks to track real stuff: how many goats went to the temple, how much grain went to a brewer, whether someone paid their beer tax. Yes, there was a beer tax. Your clay tablet begins to take shape. Narum, 10 baskets of barley, 5 shekels of silver owed payment pending temple review. You pause. The silver symbol looks weird. You fix it with a little extra wedge. The barley marks crooked A close enough, and just like that, you've made a receipt. A one-of-a-kind, unfakeable contract pressed in clay to be dried in the sun and stored until someone yells about it again. There's no paper, no carbon copies, no folder labeled Q3 disputes. Just shelves of hardened mud sitting behind the temple storeroom, each one a tiny, bureaucratic time bomb waiting to be read. If it breaks, the debt vanishes. If it's preserved, it might just outlast empires. Historians still argue whether these early receipts were purely practical or if they held some kind of sacred weight, maybe a contract witnessed by divine forces. After all, these tablets often lived in temples, and the scribes like you were technically part of the priestly class. But then again, some of these records are just tally marks next to doodles of cows. So, it's debatable. Next to you, another scribe leans in and whispers, "I once spelled fish wrong, and they made me copy poetry for 2 weeks." You nod solemnly. The punishment fits the typo. As the sky darkens, you walk your new tablet over to the drying shelf, a clay rack shaded beneath a woven mat. Already there are dozens lined up, each one unique, some neat and official, others sloppy and rushed. If it rains, most of these will melt. If it doesn't, some might survive for 5,000 years buried beneath dust and palace ruins, waiting to be rediscovered by some poor grad student with a toothbrush. You turn back toward the marketplace as the last rays of sun flicker behind a ziggurat's jagged silhouette. Oil lamps sputter to life. A vendor packs up his onions. Somewhere a bored child pokes a turtle with a stick. It's not glamorous, but it's real. You are now part of something bigger than you, part of the world's first paper trail. You've invented paperwork. Congratulations. And even though the system's made of dirt and sticks, somehow it works. Barley still changes hands. Donkeys still get borrowed. Debt still gets recorded. The economy rolls on, one little wedge at a time. The next morning starts as always with a rooster that may or may not belong to anyone screaming like it owns the city. You wake on a straw mat inside a clay-walled room that smells faintly of wet reeds, dried figs, and whatever your roommate tracked in last night. The sun hasn't yet crested the temple towers, but the buzz of life outside has already begun. Carts rumbling, livestock grunting, and a neighbor trying to convince his goat not to follow him to work again. You stretch bones popping like uncooked lentils and prepare for another thrilling day of counting. Again. Because in ancient Sumer, while kings get statues and gods get ziggurats, it's the scribes like you who keep the city from collapsing into absolute goat-fueled chaos. Today's assignment. You've been tasked with inventorying a shipment of temple donations. Think of it like Black Friday, but with more fish and fewer fistfights. You head to the temple granary, a giant sun-baked warehouse with thick walls to keep things cool and enough sacks of grain to feed a small army or a large family of really dramatic teenagers. Your stylus is tucked behind your ear, and you carry a fresh stack of clay tablets still soft and slightly sticky. One wrong sneeze, and that's a half-day's work ruined. No pressure. Inside, a priest in a mustard-yellow robe gestures vaguely toward the hall. Wheat, barley, dates, some lentils, maybe a jug of oil or two. Write it down before someone eats it. Ah, yes, another precision-oriented job. You crouch beside a mountain of baskets and begin. Every item gets its own mark, an ancient, proto-iconic symbol for each thing. Barley looks kind of like a sideways comb. Dates are a squiggly oval. Oil is, let's call it, ambiguous liquid blob. And these symbols, they go back centuries, evolving from simple pictograms into abstract standardized marks. This, dear listener, is where receipt paper as you know it starts to glimmer on the timeline. The idea of proving something happened with physical marks, whether carved into stone or printed on gas station thermal paper, is born right here in these warehouses of edible chaos. Of course, there's no fixed layout, no margins, no font size, and spell check. That's your boss hitting you with a stick. You pause as a laborer passes by hoisting a crate of dried fish so pungent you momentarily question your will to live. You scribble 4 crates questionable aroma into the margin. Will anyone read that? Maybe. Will it survive 1,000 years in a pottery shard? Also maybe. Historians still argue whether Sumerians developed writing primarily for trade or if it evolved from religious needs tracking temple offerings, sacrifices, and spiritual debts. Some argue that the earliest writing was divine accounting. Others think it was just people being very, very concerned about someone walking off with their goats. The answer, as usual, is probably both and something else entirely. You keep pressing shapes into the clay as the light shifts fingers coated in fine dust. You're not writing a poem, you're not composing a prayer, you're doing math, you're recording reality, you're inventing the spreadsheet, and it's weirdly satisfying. One of the priests walks over with a jug of date wine and sloshes it dramatically. 12 units, he says. You glance at the jug. 10, maybe, you mutter. He raises an eyebrow. You scribble 12. This is how office politics began. As you finish your back aching and your tablet now a battlefield of wedge-shaped inklessness, you glance over at a shelf lined with tablets from last week. You spot one from that barley dispute, a half-smashed clay rectangle with your own scrawled signature wedge at the bottom. It's like finding your own receipt in an ancient glove compartment. And just for a moment, you wonder who was the first person to think I should really write this down, who decided that truth could be preserved in a handful of symbols on a wet square. That's the magic of it. You aren't just tallying lentils, you're holding a piece of time. Sumerian receipts weren't just about tracking stuff, they became legal instruments. Contracts, loans, wills, marriage agreements. One especially delightful tablet found in Lagash recorded that a man promised his wife 30 goats if he took a second wife. Romantic. And sometimes receipts told stories. A merchant might jot down that he lent 5 donkeys to a caravan headed for Elam with a note return expected mid-spring unless robbed, which frankly feels like something you'd write on a sticky note today. Your fingers cramp, you press the final wedge into the clay, setting it beside the others to dry. The tablet is curved slightly from the weight of your palm, and you hope the priest doesn't mind the smudge near the oil tally. Behind you, a small boy watches, fascinated. He asks if he can try. You give him a scrap piece. He immediately draws a lopsided bird and writes his name with the grace of a sleepy chicken. Still, he looks proud. Maybe he'll be a scribe too one day, or maybe he'll invent the ancient version of a paper shredder. Outside, the sun is now high, casting sharp shadows along the mud brick walls. A breeze rolls in off the river, carrying the sound of drums and flute. Somewhere a wedding is beginning. You pick up your stylus, brush the clay from your robe, and walk away from the temple with another half-dozen receipts in your bag. Each one a miniature time capsule. Each one a forgotten argument or a half-promised repayment or a list of stuff that may or may not actually exist. And you're the witness. The archivist. The first human cog in the machine of record-keeping. Congratulations again. You've invented clerical work. Don't worry, there are 14 more sections of this. By the time you reach the scribal quarters that afternoon, the sun has turned the clay paths into a kind of warm, foot-molding paste. You squelch your way through the narrow alleys, dodging a cart carrying what smells like expired cheese and a donkey who appears to have given up on life mid-step. The scribal quarters sit near the temple naturally because the temple owns basically everything, but they're humble, even cozy. Reed mats line the walls, and in the corner, a single window allows in enough light to write without summoning the gods of eye strain. You settle into your favorite spot, a low bench near the window, right beside the oldest scribe in the city. He's about 120 years old, give or take 40, and his main contribution these days is muttering. That's not how we did it in King Enshakushana's time, regardless of the topic. But he knows everything, including how receipt recording got its true start. You know he rasps, wagging a finger so wrinkled it could be classified as a document itself. It all began with tokens. Ah, yes, clay tokens. You remember this from your training. Before there were tablets, there were tiny objects, pea-sized lumps of clay shaped like cones, spheres, pyramids, and other suspiciously board game-looking pieces. Each one represented something: a sheep, a jar of oil, a measure of grain. They were used for thousands of years before anyone thought to flatten the system into writing. Back then, if someone owed you 6 sheep, you didn't write that down, you handed over 6 tiny sheep-shaped tokens. And if you were the paranoid type, you'd even seal those tokens into a clay envelope called a bulla. Literal clay mail. That way, if there was ever a dispute, you could break it open and prove what was promised. Boom. The world's first tamper-proof packaging. You toy with a lump of clay, pressing your thumb into it and imagining all the little tokens hidden inside. It's not hard to see how the next step happened. Someone, probably a lazy genius, said, "Why not just press the tokens into the envelope before sealing it so we don't have to open it at all?" The impressions acted like a summary. Then someone else said, "Why not skip the tokens and just press the shapes directly into a flat tablet?" And just like that, writing began. Historians still argue whether the shift from tokens to tablets was gradual or sudden, and whether it was economic pressure, temple bureaucracy, or sheer convenience that pushed the change. One theory: it was simply about weight. Carrying 45 sheep tokens in your tunic is not ideal. You glance at the old man who's now dozing with his stylus poking his forehead like an accidental unicorn. You smile and return to your work cataloging today's receipts into the temple ledger. Each new entry begins the same: the item, the amount, the recipient. Sometimes you add a tiny pictograph of the god the donation is meant for. Enlil gets a mountain. Inanna gets a star. Occasionally you get bored and draw a smiley face behind the barley. The day drones on in soft clacks of styluses tapping clay. A bird lands on the windowsill and watches you with unnerving judgment, as if even the local wildlife is critiquing your penmanship. Another scribe leans over and shows you a tablet she's working on. It's from a merchant deal, 20 jugs of oil transported from Uruk to Eridu to be delivered within the next full moon. If late, the payment drops by 1/3. And yes, it's all right there on a 6-inch piece of clay. Legal contracts enforced by the gods and some very nervous delivery boys. I used the triangular stylus for this one, she says casually, as if revealing a new fashion trend. Styluses come in all shapes, round, square, flat, depending on the script style. You nod appreciatively, because yes, that triangular wedge gives her numbers a truly aggressive flair. Then you overhear 2 scribes whispering about a new development in Ur. Rumor has it someone there is experimenting with vertical columns for numbers instead of scattered horizontal rows. Looks neater, they say. More readable. You sigh. Just when you think you've mastered the system, someone starts reinventing the receipt. One of the quirkiest tablets you've seen lately was from a potter who claimed he lost 6 amphorae due to river misadventure, which might be the most poetic way anyone's ever said, "Oops, I dropped it." You made a copy for your collection. It now sits proudly beside the one where a shepherd documented that 3 of his sheep ran away due to fear of lightning. And then there's the growing problem of forgeries. Yes, even in Sumer, people try to fudge receipts. One merchant tried to carve an extra line on an old receipt to turn 3 silver into 8 silver. Problem is, he used a different clay mix. His forgery crumbled like a stale cookie. That's why the temple is starting to assign official seals. You glance at yours, a small cylinder with a carved image of a lion biting the moon. You roll it over the clay at the end of each tablet. It's like a signature, a mark of truth. And if someone tries to fake it, well, let's just say there's a reason the temple has a punishment pit. Outside, the heat has finally started to wane. You gather your day's work and wrap it in linen to carry home. Each tablet is dense, yet oddly satisfying in your hands, like a pocket-sized legacy. You wonder, as you walk past the perfume sellers and the baker shouting about his slightly burned loaves, whether any of these receipts will survive. Whether someone thousands of years from now might dig them up and think, wow, this person really hated counting jugs of lentils. You stop at the edge of the canal where boats drift lazily past. One boatman waves with his foot. You nod back. You hold a tablet up to the fading sun, and its shadow falls like a whisper over the water. It's funny. No one praises the person who invented receipt paper, but without you, without scribes, there would be no history, no deals, no debts, no proof. Just a world where everyone insists, I definitely gave you that fish and no one can prove otherwise. You tuck the clay back into your satchel and head home, the sounds of the city softening into evening. Tomorrow there will be more fish, more tablets, more marks. But for now, there's dinner. And maybe, if you're lucky, a bath that doesn't involve frogs. You wake to the smell of warm barley bread and the gentle chaos of goats arguing in the alley. Your joints crack like dry reeds as you stretch clearly. Sleeping on a woven mat doesn't qualify as orthopedic, but you're up and there's another long day ahead, cataloging what others leave behind in a city where people own more pots than they have teeth. The streets are already buzzing. Bakers yell about crust thickness. Merchants slap their goods for emphasis. Somewhere a child yells, "Mine," with enough conviction to challenge divine law. You make your way to the temple's north annex, a lesser-known wing, mostly forgotten by the public, but beloved by scribes. It's where the old receipt tablets are stored. You've been assigned a thrilling task today, reorganizing the oat surplus archives from the reign of King Lugalanda. Yes, that Lugalanda, the one historians still argue over. Was he a ruthless bureaucrat or just really into oat logistics? Nobody knows for sure, because most of what survives are inventory records. Literally thousands of tablets, many of them listing nothing but units of grain oil, and the occasional suspiciously vague line item like miscellaneous poultry. You brush the dust from a stack labeled Nippur Warehouse 6. The clay is cracked in places, but the script remains legible. Each line, each wedge-shaped mark is a whisper from a 4,000-year-old accountant. One tablet details a shipment of lentils received on the 4th day of the 10th month, noting they were sufficiently dried but slightly spotted. You admire the honesty. It's the kind of feedback your own supervisor never gives unless it's about your handwriting. The tablets are stacked like bricks with the older ones deeper in the vault. It's here, surrounded by the smell of clay and time, that you find something unusual, a tablet wrapped in reed fiber. Someone thought this one deserved protection. You unwrap it carefully. It's not like the others. This receipt doesn't just list a transaction. It tells a story. A merchant from Lagash named Iluna paid 10 silver pieces for what he believed was divine-grade incense. The seller, however, had shaved some of the resin with fine sand. When the incense was burned during a ceremony for Inanna, the flames sputtered and fizzled, causing widespread offense and at least one accidental singeing of a priest's eyebrow. The receipt contains Iluna's complaint, the penalty imposed, repayment, and public apology, and the judgment rendered by the temple scribe. It's an early example of consumer protection, and maybe one of the first recorded bad reviews. You log it in the temple archive under incense fraud, a category that now contains 2 tablets, and yet here you are millennia later tracing those moments with your fingers. Outside, a young scribe is being trained on the proper formation of the number 7. He keeps making it backwards, and his teacher keeps groaning like someone with sand permanently in their sandals. You smile, remembering your own early mistakes, like the time you recorded an entire barley delivery to the wrong temple. Enki's priests were confused, but delighted. Back inside, you make a game out of translating particularly long receipts without blinking. One of them, from a storehouse near Eridu, lists 114 separate items, including 2 damaged baskets, a broken fish hook, and 1 jug believed haunted. You pause. Haunted. The notation simply says whales at night. Fringe detail, absolutely, but also oddly relatable. Historians still debate how much Sumerians believed in curses affecting inventory. Some say it was just a way to explain spoilage or breakage. Others argue it was a serious concern. If a storage jar shrieked in the dark, you didn't question it. You moved out and left snacks behind as an offering. As the sun shifts, you take a break and snack on some dates, watching workers haul baskets of clay up from the riverbank. You note the quality firm, not too wet. Perfect for receipts. The clay you use has to be just right. Too dry and it cracks. Too wet and your stylus slides around like a drunken fish. You think about your tools. Your stylus is made from a carved reed, one end, flattened, the other chiseled to a wedge. You own 3 each for different scripts, simple ceremonial and emergency rush job. They're like extensions of your fingers now. You could probably write 10 sheep to Temple of Ninhursag in your sleep. You may have already. As you return to sorting, you uncover another strange one, a clay tag tied to what once held a sealed jar of honey. It's tiny, barely 2 inches across, but its inscription is elegant. Sweet tribute from the bees of Uruk. A poetic receipt. Someone cared enough to dress up what could have been a simple record. You imagine the scribe who wrote it humming to himself, maybe hoping his flair would get him noticed. You file it under unusually romantic descriptions, right next to spices for a wedding that did not happen. As you continue your work, the quiet of the archive settles around you like a blanket. The heat of the day melts into the cool clay walls, and the sun's angle turns the air golden. You're alone now, just you and thousands of clay voices, each one trying to be heard across centuries. It's a humbling thought how much of life was captured not in epic poems or grand inscriptions, but in these receipts, the humble, forgotten backbone of civilization. Proof that someone gave someone else something, that a promise was made, that it mattered. You stretch your arms, letting your back pop in protest. There's still another cartload to sort. Somewhere in this vault might be the first ever late fee or the first documented refund. And if you find it, you'll give it the reverence it deserves, because in the world of clay paperwork, every smudged wedge mark is a monument. And honestly, it's more exciting than temple politics. You smile to yourself and get back to work. The sun is slipping behind the ziggurat as you step outside the archives, your tunic clinging to you in the lingering heat. The air smells of baked earth and roasting onions. You decide to head to the docks. Not because you particularly like Doc's, who really enjoys the scent of drying fish and muddy sandals, but because that's where new shipments arrive, and with them new receipts. Tonight a caravan is arriving from the north lugging all sorts of treasures, stone blocks, from the Zagros Mountains bundles of dyed wool and exotic items whose names you'll never quite pronounce correctly, even if you mumble them with confidence. This is where the real magic of Sumerian paperwork begins. You see, every trade transaction here doesn't just involve goods, it involves clay. A hunched scribe squats near a basket of dried figs, scribbling onto a tablet as quickly as his stylus allows. He's got ink stains on his elbows and the concentration of someone defusing a bomb. You step closer and glance over his shoulder. He's tallying the trade between two merchants, one from and one from the obscure town of Shurupak, which mostly survives in the historical record because of how fun it is to say aloud. The scribe mutters under his breath, something about inconsistent weights and one suspiciously underfilled jar of sesame oil. You offer to help, which he reluctantly accepts after looking you up and down like you're a pair of sandals 2 sizes too small. You take over his tablet and begin your favorite part of the job, making the numbers behave. As you smooth the clay with your palm, you think about the Sumerians' number system base, 60. Yes, 60. Because 10 is too easy and 12 is for amateurs. Historians still argue whether this was because of practical reasons like tracking lunar cycles or because someone just wanted to make school harder for everyone. But once you get used to it, base 60 is surprisingly elegant. You can divide it evenly in more ways, which makes it great for splitting a shipment of copper ingots 12 ways without starting a fistfight. The merchant from begins loudly complaining that the figs aren't as juicy as promised. You let that drama unfold without you. Instead, you finish up the tablet, complete with a symbol showing certified by the Temple of Enlil, and hand it back with a satisfied pat. And then you see it's something weird. Another scribe, working a bit too quickly under a flickering torch, is using a strange kind of pre-made tag. It's thin, small, and oval-shaped, just large enough for a few characters and a number. He punches a hole through it with a sharpened reed and threads it onto a hemp string tied around a bundle of dried onions. You raise an eyebrow. This isn't normal receipt protocol. Most documentation is done on flat clay tablets. But this is minimalist, portable, and weirdly stylish. A pocket-sized receipt. You strike up a conversation with him. He says it's called a bulla tag, a sort of abbreviated contract made for traders who don't want to lug around full-sized tablets. He says they're popular upriver, especially among goat herders who prefer hanging their paperwork on their animals instead of carrying it themselves. That's when you realize you're staring at the Sumerian version of a shipping label. Of course, historians still debate whether bulla tags were actually receipts ID tokens or some form of rudimentary barcoding system. Some argue they evolved from older sealed clay balls called bullae, which contained tokens representing goods. Others think these tags are just overhyped luggage labels, but either way, this is innovation and you love it. You borrow one to examine it more closely. It's feather-light, maybe an inch across, but beautifully formed. The symbols are clean. There's a slight thumbprint on the back, likely from the maker. You smile. That's the thing about these old tools, they carry their makers inside them in tiny accidental details. You file this moment away for later. Maybe you'll write a tablet about it. Discovery of strange onion tag by one who noticed. Very catchy. Might even get you bumped up to senior scribe. Back at the archives the next morning, your thoughts linger on the bulla tag. You start to imagine a system lightweight, standardized receipts that could be strung together like a bead necklace, portable data, mobile contracts. You envision a trader showing up to a market flashing his string of clay tags like a VIP lanyard, each one stamped with a different transaction, a different date, a different dusty handshake. Could this be the future of record-keeping? You pitch the idea to your mentor, an elder scribe named Abzu Malik, who looks like a talking sand dune. He squints at the tag sniffs and says, "Too small. People will lose them." You nod respectfully. He has a point. But secretly you disagree. In a world where traders spend days on the road and every ounce matters, lighter might just be better. And it isn't just about size. These tags represent a shift in thinking from storing information in place to storing it with the person. You think about how receipts are no longer bound to a temple wall or an archive shelf. Now they travel, they walk, they breathe. Later, you return to your work sorting through a pile of overdue tax receipts. One tablet complains about a man named Kubaba who keeps trying to pay his barley taxes in stale beer. Another mentions a trader who claimed to have delivered goats but couldn't produce witnesses his animals had wandered off during divine thunder. Sure they did, buddy. And yet it all has to be written down. The Sumerians were obsessed with recording everything, no matter how trivial. Historians often ask, was it bureaucracy for control or bureaucracy for comfort? Maybe both. Maybe writing it down made the world feel more manageable, tangible, real. You pause at that thought. Because even now, thousands of years later, someone you is reading those same receipts, listening to their stories, learning from their inkless words, and you start to feel it again, that subtle awe. The idea that even the dullest paperwork, the scratchy bones of civilization, can carry echoes of laughter, pettiness, cleverness, frustration, and the occasional haunted jug. You tuck the tiny tag into your satchel just in case someone asks about it. Just in case someone someday needs to know that once upon a time someone bought onions and proof of that was worn by the onions themselves. You stretch your legs as you leave the archives again, your knees pop with a sound not unlike a splitting pomegranate. Across the plaza, the market is still buzzing, though the heat has settled into that sleepy golden haze that makes everyone move a little slower. You stroll toward the edge of the temple district, where scribes and priests share awkward boundaries with potters and livestock pens. You're on a mission now. The onion tag stuck in your mind like fig paste in molars. You want to see where these odd little receipts come from, how they're made, how they're used. Not everyone's thrilled when you show up asking questions, though. One potter gives you a flat look and keeps shaping his bowl, muttering something about scribes having too much time and not enough cows. But then you find her. She's maybe 15 years old, sitting cross-legged behind a stall of charms amulets and, yes, tiny clay tags. She's stamping them with a carved cylinder seal, rolling out patterns that look like constellations collided with crop reports. Her hands are quick, her brow furrowed in focus, but when you ask about the tags, she lights up like an oil lamp on festival night. They're not just receipts, she explains, her voice proud. They're promises. This one is for a full jug of beer. This one 10 dates and a kiss from a widow. He said it was part of the deal. She snorts at that. It's all in the record. You watch her roll a seal across a new tag, the design crisp and rhythmic cuneiform characters nestled among tiny images, a jar, a sheaf of barley, a fish with what might be fangs you don't ask. People like them, she says. They feel safer with them. You give someone one of these, they can't say they forgot the deal. They wear it on their belt or around their neck. Sometimes they even bury it under a goat pen just in case. You nod, tracing your finger over one of the stamps. It's clever, compact, and surprisingly personal. A little chunk of mud that says I was here. I traded this. We agreed. You take one home. That night by lamplight, you try to make one yourself. It does not go well. Your seal-rolling skills are less precise artisan and more squashed beetle festival. The clay cracks. Your symbols slant. You manage to accidentally stamp a part of your elbow onto the corner. Still, you're proud of it. Not because it's good, it's terrible, but because it connects you to something deeper. The transformation of memory into object. You realize this isn't just about receipts. It's about memory that can't be misquoted. About freezing a moment and handing it to someone else with confidence. Here, look. It happened. This was real. Historians still argue whether this kind of portable tagging system influenced later writing cultures. Some believe these early mobile records inspired the concept of personal documents. Passports permits ID badges. Others think they were a dead-end innovation, a practical fad that burned briefly and disappeared under centuries of dust. But as you cradle your crooked little tag, you think even fads leave fossils. The next morning, the temple scribe, yes, the elbow ink guy, summons you. He's heard about your fascination with those mini-mud things, as he eloquently puts it. You brace for a lecture, but instead he offers you a challenge. The high priest needs a portable inventory, he says, picking dirt from under his fingernails. For the donkey caravan heading to Nippur. Can you tag everything they're carrying without making us look like fools? You try not to grin, this is your moment, so you get to work. Each bundle, jug, and crate gets its own tag. You develop a simple coding system, a mark for the item, a mark for the destination, and one for the date. You stamp them, string them, and secure them with a dry nod to each porter. It's tedious but satisfying, like solving a jigsaw puzzle made of sun-baked dirt. At one point, a merchant leans over and mutters, "What if they lose the tags?" You glance at the bulging sacks of lentils and say, "Then they're welcome to eat their way through the shipment, and guess what was supposed to be there?" He doesn't ask again. By dusk, the caravan is ready. 40 donkeys, 30 sacks, 10 jugs, 4 crates, and 2 extremely angry geese listed only as emotional cargo. Every item tagged, logged, and duplicated on a clay tablet for temple records. You watch the caravan depart, the clink of clay tags echoing softly with every step. It sounds like an orchestra made of muted wind chimes. There's something beautiful about that. The way sound itself becomes part of the record. Every clack a reminder of a promise, a payment, a plan. Later that week, you hear the tags held up well. One broke, but the porter replaced it with a bit of bone scratched with a stylus. You find that charming? Improvised record-keeping? History's little hacks. You sit back with your crooked elbow tag, the one you made yourself, and you wonder how many receipts still sit out there buried, lost, worn thin by time. How many tiny stories are still whispering from mud and dust. How many little lies were caught and how many truths forgotten. Because receipts are like ghosts, really. They haunt the spaces between action and memory. They whisper, "You did this. Don't pretend you didn't." You think of that girl in the market stamping dreams into clay. You think of your own cracked tablet tucked under your sleeping mat like a secret, and you think maybe it's not so boring after all. You wake up to the sound of clinking again. Not the gentle music box chime of clay tags from the caravan, but a more aggressive, chaotic kind. You shuffle outside to find 2 scribes squabbling over a bucket of beer tokens. They're red in the face and waving tablets like swords. Apparently, there's been a mix-up. Each of them claims ownership of a nearly identical receipt tag. Same cylinder seal, same markings, same trade. But only 1 jug of barley beer. The high priest in his infinite wisdom has asked you to sort it out. You sigh. This is what you get for being the receipt person now. So you sit them down and inspect the tokens. They're expertly made, both using the same seal pattern, those little fish with the possibly fanged mouths again. You resist the urge to roll your eyes. It turns out these 2 have been using the same apprentice seal to speed things up. Not good. You mutter something under your breath about how this is why receipt forgery laws should be a thing. Forgery. Yes, that's what it is now. See, that's the problem when your whole system is based on little chunks of clay. Anyone can press a seal, especially if they borrow or liberate someone else's. That's where the priests come in. They don't just record, they authenticate. That's why they sometimes press a counter seal or add a scribe's signature to the tag. A kind of, this has been verified by someone with very clean hands and 0 livestock. But this situation, it's a mess. Both scribes are red-faced, and now a third person is claiming the same token was stolen. You ask for corroboration. One of them brings a sheep as a witness. The sheep is not helpful. This, you realize, is your first lesson in early receipt fraud. Historians still argue whether forgery was widespread in Sumer or more of a fringe concern. Some clay tablets contain warnings, threats, and even curses aimed at would-be liars. May and Lil strike down anyone who alters this record. Very serious stuff, especially from a culture that also thought it was a good idea to invent accounting before sliced bread. The Sumerians developed increasingly elaborate systems to prevent fraud. That meant more than just tags. Sometimes they enclosed the tag in a clay envelope, yes, an envelope made of clay. You'd have to break the outer shell to read the contract inside. The broken shell served as proof that the tag had been accessed. It's like ancient tamper-evident packaging minus the barcode. You try making one of these clay envelopes and it's honestly pretty satisfying. You write a short contract on a tiny tablet. Give this guy one goat and don't ask questions, then seal it inside a smooth layer of fresh clay. You press your makeshift seal into the outer shell. Voila, a clay cocoon of bureaucracy. You imagine tossing it onto a merchant's lap and walking away like a cuneiform cowboy. The system is clunky, sure, but it works. Until it doesn't. One day someone tries to argue that a broken envelope means the agreement is void. The seal was cracked. They say so clearly it doesn't count anymore. You pinch the bridge of your nose and mumble something about how interpretation ruins everything. So now you're dealing not just with receipts, but with receipt philosophy. What does it mean to record a promise? Is the seal the truth, or is the seal a witness to the truth? You sit at the edge of a canal, chucking clay crumbs into the water, wondering if you've accidentally become a theologian. That night, an elder scribe tells you about a truly ancient clay tablet found near Eridu. It's barely readable, the surface worn by time and thumbprints, but it seems to reference a transaction between two people who likely never met. A kind of remote agreement confirmed by third parties and stamped with matched seals. A proto-contract, a prehistoric escrow. And that's when it clicks for you. Receipts didn't just track goods. They built trust across distance. They were part of a larger idea that you could organize a society not just through strength or fear, but through mutual accountability. That's how cities worked, how trade flourished, how empires quietly snuck up on people sipping fermented fig juice. You think of modern society, digital receipts, barcodes, multi-factor authentication. You think of that time you forgot your Apple ID password and got locked out of your phone for 9 years. You realize it's all connected. Your cracked little elbow tag, the ancestor of two-factor authentication. Kind of. Still, the more you learn, the more complicated it gets. Clay shrinks when it dries. Some seals blur. A rushed scribe can accidentally record the wrong number of goats, and suddenly someone has a lot more goat than they deserve. Or less. That's why some tablets use redundancy. Numbers are spelled out and symbolized. Items are drawn and named. It's early data backup. Belt and suspenders. You're amused but also a little impressed. They didn't even have spreadsheets, but they understood data integrity. You start seeing receipts everywhere now. The way a gatekeeper notes your name. The list scratched onto the temple door. The shells hanging from a merchant's stall, each one marked with a trade. All primitive receipts. And you wonder, what were you before all this? Just a dusty pair of sandals wandering through Uruk. Now you're a record keeper, a logician, maybe a little bit of a spy. Every transaction whispers a story and you're listening harder than ever. That evening, the high priest stops you in the street. He holds up one of your clay tags from the caravan. This, he says, didn't break, didn't blur, didn't lie. You try not to beam, but he walks away before you can say thanks. You turn the tag in your fingers. It's warm from the sun. Just a bit of clay hardened by fire and time, but in its own sleepy, baked way, kind of perfect. You pick up the morning like a fresh piece of clay, soft and full of potential. The city hums quietly around you with merchants setting up their stalls, children chasing chickens, and a steady murmur of voices that sounds almost like a river of words flowing through the streets. Your fingers still carry the faint grit of yesterday's receipts, but today your job shifts gears. Now you're delving into the origins of the very clay tablets themselves. You probably didn't realize that the humble tablet your daily companion started as nothing more than a lump of mud and straw. No high-tech materials here, just earth, water, and a bit of human ingenuity. You imagine some early farmer, probably bored after a long day of harvesting barley, smashing clay between his fingers, inadvertently inventing the perfect medium for record-keeping. You press your thumb into the clay lump, feeling its cool resistance, just as the first Sumerian scribes must have done. These proto-tablets were simple, flat, soft, and easy to inscribe with a sharp reed stylus. You think about how the stylus itself was a kind of early pen, a reed sharpened to a wedge perfect for pressing those iconic wedge-shaped marks, the cuneiform characters that would later immortalize everything from epic poems to mundane grocery lists. It's a slow, calming process to inscribe the clay. You imagine the scribe's repetitive wrist movements, the soothing scratch of stylus meeting clay. The tactile rhythm must have been almost meditative, like a pottery wheel spinning in time with the scribe's steady breath. Historians still argue whether early tablets were primarily for accounting or storytelling, but you suspect they served both. After all, what's a good receipt but a mini-story? It tells who gave what to whom, when, and sometimes why. It's a snapshot of daily life frozen in clay for millennia. Then you notice a particularly charming tablet decorated with impressions of a fish, a goat, and a loaf of bread. The artistry is simple but deliberate. It's almost as if the scribes were not just recording data, but adding a touch of personality like a doodle on the back of a modern receipt. You recall that some tablets also included what might be called early emojis, little pictographs, that added emotional context or humor to the message. One tablet even shows a smiling face next to a debt note, possibly a way to soften the sting of owing money. You imagine the debtor winking as they handed over the clay, hoping to charm their creditor. This playful aspect of Sumerian record-keeping is often overshadowed by the serious nature of bureaucracy, but it's a reminder that ancient people like us found ways to make paperwork less tedious. As you trace the faded lines of an old tablet, you remember how fragile these objects are. Wet clay hardens into a durable ceramic-like state once baked, but before firing, it can be easily altered or destroyed. This vulnerability led scribes to sometimes rewrite tablets or press multiple copies, an early form of data backup. You can't help but chuckle at the thought of a Sumerian version of Carl Plus Z. Without digital undo buttons, a smudged tablet meant starting over from scratch quite literally. The weight of history presses gently on your hands as you cradle these little slabs of clay, realizing they are more than just receipts. They're the first written footprints of human civilization, the original paper trail, a whisper from the distant past, saying, "We were here, we counted, we cared." And as you place another tablet carefully onto a wooden shelf, you feel connected not just to the Sumerian scribes, but to every person who ever tried to make sense of their world through words and symbols. You find yourself walking through the busy marketplace of the bustling heart of ancient Sumer. The air is thick with the scent of spices, fresh bread, and the faintest hint of baked clay from the tablets piled high on merchants' stalls. It's here amid the calls of vendors and the shuffle of sandals on packed earth that you begin to understand the real-life usefulness of those small clay records. Each tablet you handle is like a miniature ledger, a detailed account of daily transactions. You watch as a merchant exchanges barley for silver, jotting down the exact quantities on a tablet while his assistant counts out coins. These clay slips, though seemingly crude, are surprisingly efficient. They keep the wheels of commerce turning smoothly and ensure no one gets shortchanged or confused about who owes what. You lean in closer to examine a particularly neat tablet, its cuneiform script crisp and precise. It's an ancient receipt for the delivery of sheep, detailing not only the number, but also the age and health of each animal. You imagine the shepherd anxiously awaiting payment, hoping the numbers are correct. The tablet acts as a silent contract, a guardian of trust in a world without lawyers or digital records. But there's something else you notice about these receipts, the occasional quirky addition like a tiny drawing of a sheep with an exaggeratedly fluffy tail. It's as if the scribe, after a long day of inscribing dry numbers, decided to inject a bit of personality into their work. These small doodles were early forms of humor or commentary, subtle reminders that behind every transaction was a living, breathing story. Historians still argue whether these sketches were common practice or unique to particular scribes, but they add a charming human touch to the otherwise serious business of record-keeping. Nearby, a group of women barter for spices and textiles, each trade carefully noted on separate tablets. You notice the script on some tablets is more fluid, perhaps written by a more practiced hand, or a scribe specialized in trade records. This variation hints at an early form of professional specialization in the world of writing a fact often overlooked when we think of ancient scribes as all-knowing experts. You pause to imagine the life of a scribe, how they must have felt like the ultimate multitaskers, balancing numbers, contracts, and social dynamics, all while trying to keep their handwriting legible enough to avoid disputes. You chuckle quietly at the thought of a frustrated scribe scribbling, "Do not argue with this tablet," as a footnote. The marketplace's constant rhythm reinforces the crucial role these tablets played in society. Without them, chaos would have reigned, barley might have been overpaid for debts forgotten, and goods lost in the shuffle. These small slabs of clay brought order to a complex, interconnected world. And as the sun dips lower, casting long shadows over Ur's mud-brick walls, you feel the comforting weight of these early records, tiny ancient anchors in the vast sea of human history. You wander away from the lively marketplace and toward the quieter, administrative quarters of where the scribes dwell in their sunlit rooms surrounded by piles of clay tablets. Here, the process of creating these receipts takes on a more formal tone. You watch as a scribe carefully presses a stylus into soft clay, making precise wedge-shaped marks that will harden into permanent records once baked in the sun or kiln. This process might seem slow and cumbersome to you, but it was revolutionary for the Sumerians. These receipts weren't just random notes. They were standardized tools of commerce and governance, the ancient equivalent of today's digital invoices. You imagine the satisfaction a scribe must have felt, knowing that their neat rows of cuneiform were the backbone of a thriving economy. You also discover that some tablets included signatures or seals. Instead of a messy scribble, these seals were impressions made by rolling carved cylinders over the clay, creating intricate patterns unique to each official or merchant. These seals served as authenticators, guaranteeing that the receipt was legitimate. It's a bit like today's signatures, but with a flair of ancient artistry. One quirky detail you stumble upon is the use of false receipts forgeries created to trick others. The idea that even back then someone might try to game the system with counterfeit tablets adds an amusing twist to your understanding of ancient commerce. You smile at the timeless nature of human cunning. Historians still debate how widespread forgery was and whether strict punishments were effective deterrents. Some suggest these false receipts may have been a rare phenomenon, while others argue they were a common nuisance requiring constant vigilance. You reflect on how these systems, tokens, tablets, seals together formed an intricate web of trust, reliability, and accountability. Without such innovations, you realize the Sumerian economy couldn't have flourished. And as you glance outside the scribe's window, the golden sun filters through date palms, casting a gentle glow on the city that first dared to put business down in writing. You step outside into the dusty streets of where the hum of everyday life continues unabated. Here you witness how these ancient receipts weren't just tools for merchants or officials, they impacted ordinary people's lives in subtle, often surprising ways. For example, farmers and shepherds relied heavily on these clay records to prove ownership or to negotiate trade deals for their produce and animals. You imagine yourself as a humble farmer waiting for a delivery of barley seeds to arrive. Without a written receipt, it would be difficult to prove that you had paid for them or that the supplier had fulfilled their part. These tablets were your protection against confusion or unfairness, a kind of early consumer rights document. What strikes you as especially charming is the way these records sometimes included notes to self-scribbled in the margins, little reminders about payments due or favors owed. It's as if these ancient people like you occasionally needed a mental nudge to keep their busy lives in order. You also learn about the Sumerian system of measuring goods. They used a variety of units, gur, shekel, each meticulously recorded on receipts. The precision they aimed for might surprise you given the lack of modern tools. You picture a scale balancing tiny weights carved from stone or metal, an early exercise in careful bookkeeping. And then there's the fascinating detail that some receipts documented in-kind payments, goods or services exchanged instead of money. For example, a receipt might note that a certain amount of wool was traded for a day's labor or a meal. This bartering system was fluid but still depended on careful record-keeping to prevent disputes. Historians still argue about how standardized these units really were across different city-states. Some think variations made trade complicated, while others see a surprisingly unified economic language emerging. A fun fact you stumble across is the occasional receipt curse. Some tablets ended with ominous warnings against tampering with the document, kind of like saying, "Mess with this tablet and may the gods frown upon you." You chuckle imagining these ancient legal threats as the world's earliest customer service disclaimers. As the afternoon sun softens, you marvel at how these little clay tablets, once mundane business tools, were woven into the very fabric of Sumerian social and economic life, quiet guardians of fairness, memory, and trust. You find yourself in the temple district now, where commerce and religion blend into a complex dance. Temples weren't just places of worship, they were also economic powerhouses, managing vast stores of goods, land, and labor. Here receipts took on an even more formal and sacred role. You see priests overseeing the recording of offerings, grain, livestock, precious metals, all carefully logged onto clay tablets. This raises a fascinating thought. Receipts were not just practical documents, but also instruments of divine accountability. When a temple recorded a gift from a worshiper, it was essentially promising the gods that the gift was recognized and properly handled. You can almost hear the low chanting as a scribe carves these words, knowing they carry weight beyond mere commerce. One quirky practice you encounter is the curse formula inscribed on some temple receipts, invoking gods to punish anyone who dared alter the record. These curses could be pretty creative, threatening everything from bad dreams to endless headaches. You smile, thinking how even the ancients appreciated a good psychological deterrent. The temple's economic clout also meant these receipts helped govern labor. You learn that workers assigned to temple projects like building canals or making pottery received payment recorded on tablets, often entitling them to food rations or clothing. It's a bit like a paycheck, but instead of cash, the receipt guaranteed tangible necessities. Historians still debate whether temple economies functioned more like modern corporations or communal organizations. Some suggest temples centralized wealth and power, while others see a more distributed system of shared resources and responsibilities. Another delightful tidbit is the evidence of scribes' personality sneaking into receipts. Some tablets contain jokes, doodles, or sarcastic remarks tucked between the formal lines. It's a reminder that behind every ancient record was a human with quirks and moods. You imagine the slow, patient chiseling of symbols into soft clay, a tactile, meditative process that required both skill and a steady hand. It's intriguing how these early receipts reflect not only commerce, but the development of language and bureaucracy. The symbols started as simple pictures representing goods, but over time they grew more abstract and complex, eventually capturing ideas like numbers, dates, and contracts. You sense the birth of administrative genius in every wedge pressed into clay. You stumble across a lesser-known fact: some receipts doubled as legal contracts. If a payment wasn't made or a delivery delayed, these tablets could be presented as proof in courts or councils. This dual use shows how intertwined law and commerce were and how critical written proof had become for social order. Historians still argue whether writing primarily developed to serve economic purposes or to fulfill religious and political needs. It's likely both, but the humble receipt might just be the quiet hero in this debate. Another charming detail is the occasional scribe's signature, a personal mark or symbol added at the bottom of receipts. It was a subtle way of saying I'm accountable for this record, a bit like a modern signature or a notary's seal. You reflect on how this system of record-keeping laid the groundwork for everything from taxes to trade agreements, shaping civilization in ways that are easy to overlook in your busy, screen-filled life. As the evening settles, you almost feel the weight of history in these tablets, the echo of hands long gone pressing signs into clay, building the foundations of human society, one receipt at a time. You drift now toward the bustling marketplaces of ancient Mesopotamia, where receipts were essential tools in the daily hustle of trade. Imagine the smell of spices, the murmur of bartering voices, and the sight of merchants waving bundles of goods. Each transaction was carefully recorded not just for the buyer and seller, but often for distant officials who needed to track tax revenues or ensure fair trade. Receipts took many forms here. While clay tablets were common, you discover that sometimes merchants used small clay tokens sealed in envelopes made from clay or leather. These tokens represented quantities of goods like grain or oil and served as a sort of ancient receipt that you could carry or exchange, sort of like an early IOU. Here's a quirky nugget: some receipts included drawings of animals or objects, serving as a kind of logo or brand. It's an early form of marketing, if you will, where a merchant's mark guaranteed quality or authenticity. You might think of it as the ancient equivalent of a stamp on a package or a fancy label on a bottle. Historians still debate the exact role these tokens played in the shift from barter to money-based economies. Were they purely accounting tools, or did they also function as early currency? The answer isn't entirely clear, but their use surely smoothed the path toward more complex economic systems. Another gentle surprise is that some merchants used humor in their receipts, little puns or clever wordplay carved into clay to entertain or flatter the recipient. It's as if even in business they enjoyed a touch of whimsy to ease negotiations. As twilight deepens, you can almost picture the ancient merchants patting their sealed clay envelopes, confident their trades were recorded and their reputations intact. You now find yourself in the quieter outskirts of the city, where farmers and laborers settle accounts at the end of the season. Here receipts record the exchange of goods for services, grain for plowing, livestock for wool, or even simple promises to repay debts later. These records are less grand than temple or palace documents, but no less vital for community trust and cooperation. One fascinating detail emerges: many receipts from rural areas include personal notes about the weather or crop conditions that year, like a farmer's diary tucked into the official record. This mix of economic transaction and storytelling gives you a glimpse into the rhythms of everyday life and the subtle human touch behind cold figures. You come across an unusual type of receipt, one made not from clay but from bits of wood or bark, a reminder that not all record-keeping was carved in stone. Some historians speculate that these perishable records might have been more common than surviving tablets suggest, lost to time but once central to daily life. Historians still argue how widespread literacy was among ordinary people. Were most farmers and tradesfolk able to read and write, or did scribes handle all records? It's a question that colors how we imagine ancient society's accessibility. You also discover that some receipts served as informal social contracts, where the exchange carried emotional weight, sealing friendships or family ties. It's a gentle reminder that behind every ancient receipt was a story, a relationship, a human connection. As you settle back, you realize that these humble clay tablets, sealed envelopes, and scraps of bark form a rich tapestry, one that quietly charts the rise of civilization through the simple act of keeping track. Wind down. Now, as your eyes grow heavier and your mind softens, think of those ancient scribes, their fingers pressing symbols into soft clay by candlelight. Imagine the slow, purposeful rhythm of recording life's transactions, the quiet importance of each mark, each wedge. These tablets weren't just about numbers or goods, they were about trust, memory, and connection. Feel the gentle hum of history settling around you, the stories of people long gone, yet somehow still here whispering through time. Their simple, careful records invite you to rest, to let go of the day's noise and drift toward peaceful dreams. Let your thoughts float on the slow river of ancient commerce and community, the soft tapping of styluses on clay fading into silence. You are wrapped in the warm comfort of human continuity, a story told softly, patiently, just for you. Good night, and may your sleep be as steady and sure as the scribe's steady hands marking the dawn of our shared past.